Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Brandon. Welcome back to Marotta Media. Well, at the time of recording this video, we are officially at the beginning of December. You know what that means. It's officially Christmas time. And as I've done for the past few years, there are some Christmas movies that were released this year that I wanted to make reviews on, but I didn't feel like dedicating an entire video to both. So like I did last year when I put 3 Christmas movies that were released in 2023 into one, I thought I would do the same thing, but this time with just 2. So today you will be getting a double review of 2 Christmas movies that were released in 2024. One of them I watched about a month ago, and the other one I watched just a few days ago. And the second one I wasn't really planning on making a review on, but after watching it, I had so much to say and I'm like, yeah, I have to include this. So let's get started with the review of the first Christmas movie that I watched, that being the Christmas action film Red One. Red One tells the story of a man named Callum Drift, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who is Santa Claus's head of security. And when Santa Claus is kidnapped, it is up to Callum to team up with a man named Jack O'Malley, played by Chris Evans, who is seemingly the world's most notorious hacker. And the two of them must work together to get Santa back and save Christmas. I'm sure a lot of people really didn't have any kind of high expectations for Red One, because I most certainly did not. For starters, it contains 2 of the worst actors working today, in my opinion, in Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Chris Evans. I don't think either of them are very good actors. I mean, Chris Evans was good as Captain America, but other than that, he hasn't really done anything really all that great. The only thing that comes to mind right now that I think he was good in was Snowpiercer and Knives Out. And then there's The Rock. Even though he's been in movies that I have enjoyed, this man has absolutely no range, and I am very comfortable saying that he is one of the worst actors working today. But it doesn't matter what I say, because this guy gets people's asses into the theater to watch these bad movies, and he gets paid a shitload of money, so what do I know? And speaking of a shitload of money, this movie had a budget for that. This movie's budget was $250 million. And you would think with a budget like that, and with all of the stars that are in this movie, including J.K. Simmons and Lucy Liu, they would make something good, or at least attempt to make something good. Well, that's where you're wrong. Yeah, this is no surprise. Red One is just as bad as I was anticipating it would be. Because as I said in the intro, this movie contains actors who do not really have any kind of acting ability, and that is perfectly evident in this movie. The Rock just plays a variation of himself once again. I'm really looking forward to seeing his next movie, The Smashing Machine, that comes out next year. I think it's an A24 movie directed by one of the Safdie brothers. I'm hoping he proves us wrong with that movie, because up until this point, I have never seen a movie with The Rock in it and said, wow, The Rock was really good in that, wasn't he? But yeah, he's bad in this movie, again, just showing that he has no acting range or ability. He just plays himself. Chris Evans is more or less the same. He just gets roles because he's handsome and he doesn't really have much range either. But to my surprise, those 2 weren't even the worst performance in this movie. The worst performance in Red One easily belongs to Kiernan Shipka. Kiernan Shipka, who you might recognize from movies like Totally Killer or... Damn, what else was she in? I'm blanking right now. I'll flash it up on the screen because I can't think of anything else she was in right now. But she plays this movie's villain, whose name I honestly can't even remember because she was that forgettable. But she was easily the worst performance in this movie, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that Kiernan Shipka gave possibly one of the worst performances of 2024 in this movie. Legitimately, this is like Razzie level acting. I think it has more to do with the fact that she was just horribly miscast for her character, and that's not entirely on her, but I would think that she would do something a little bit better than what she did. The only somewhat mildly decent performance is J.K. Simmons, who plays Santa, or Nick, or Red One, as they refer to him in this movie. And this should come as no surprise, because I have never seen a performance from J.K. Simmons that I thought was bad, even in movies that aren't that great. He's clearly trying his best to make this work, but he's not in it all that much, so that doesn't really help. Not to mention that the characters are just completely empty and you're not really given any real reason to care about them. Which is really a shame because there are some really good ideas for background stories that are given to these characters, but not much is really done with them. For example, Cal, who as I said is the head of security for Santa, is on the verge of retiring, and his reason for doing so is really interesting, and I'll elaborate more on that in a bit, but it's such a good idea that they had, and they do nothing with it. The only real characterization that Chris Evans' character has is that he has a son that he doesn't really have a great relationship with. But every time there was a conversation between him and his son, or a scene that involved his son, I just sat there wondering, why am I supposed to care about this? Now, I know what you're thinking up until this point, because I've been told this a million times in my life. Oh, dude, you just hate fun. It's not meant to be serious. Just turn your brain off and have a good time. I know how to have fun, okay? There's movies I like that I had fun with that others didn't, and that's fine. But I can't have fun in a movie that I find to be so excruciatingly boring. And Red One is exactly that. This movie is boring as hell. And a reason for that is that this movie, even though it's labeled as an action movie, doesn't really have a whole lot of action. And when the action is there, it is so unbelievably bland and tame, and there's only like 3 action sequences, but none of them are worth it. I also like to imagine that this movie's working title was Sidetracking the Movie, because good God, is there a lot of sidetracking in this. There's just a multitude of scenes where the characters feel like they're just wasting time, and then they move on to the next scene where they're also wasting time. The biggest culprit of this being the scene where they go and visit Santa's brother, Krampus. This scene did have some good elements to it, but again, I'll elaborate more on that when I get to the things that I actually admired. And like most movies with ridiculously high budgets these days, this movie has some of the worst CGI that I have ever seen. The CGI just doesn't look like it's finished. It looks like an incomplete Netflix original film, and that is meant as an insult. Not to mention how long this movie is. Good God, it has such an absurdly long runtime. With a runtime of, I think, 2 hours and 15 minutes, I thought, where did this movie get off thinking that it had any right to be that long? This movie should have been an hour and 40 minutes max. Nothing higher than that. And as I said, with the amount of sidetracking in this movie, they probably could have cut out a good 35 to 40 minutes, but no, they just left it all in. Okay, now it's time to get to those things that I admired that I teased previously. So one thing I mentioned is the idea for Cal's backstory. As I said, he's retiring from his position as the head of Santa's security. And the reason he's doing this is because he feels like the world has gotten more and more naughty over the years, and he's slowly losing his faith in humanity. I truly think this is a fantastic idea for a Christmas movie. Someone high up in Santa's circle decides to leave because he says, this job isn't worth it anymore. Humans are just terrible. No one is grateful. No one is nice. No one truly appreciates what they have anymore. They could have done something awesome with this, but they didn't. This backstory, I think, is only mentioned twice. Just once when Cal brings it up for the first time, and then it comes back into play at the end, which you might have guessed. The only other good thing I could say about Red One is that it has some really impressive makeup. Specifically that scene I mentioned with Krampus and all of his other, creature friends that you see. The makeup on these creatures in this scene is really damn impressive. This looks like the only other thing that the budget went into aside from paying The Rock $50 million to be in this movie and suck it up. And I'm truly curious what they did with the rest of this movie's budget, because it sure as hell did not go into any of the other technical aspects, so what did they do with it? The last thing I will end this review on is just an expression of my disappointment, specifically when it comes to the director, because this movie was directed by Jake Kasdan. Not a household name, but Jake Kasdan's father, Lawrence Kasdan, might be, but not to everybody. Lawrence Kasdan was one of the writers for The Empire Strikes Back, and was also the sole writer on Raiders of the Lost Ark. So he wrote 2 of the greatest movies of all time, and his son made Red One. In this case, the apple fell miles away from the tree. Overall, I'd give Red One a 2 out of 10.
What is this shit?
What's going on? Why don't they like it?
We spent $250 million on this.
All right, let's move on to another completely lackluster Christmas movie that came out this year. That being the Netflix original rom-com Hot Frosty. In Hot Frosty, we follow our protagonist Kathy, played by Lacey Chabert, who is still reeling from the death of her husband. And one day while out and about, some people in the small town that Kathy lives in gives her this scarf that for some reason is magical. And for another reason that's not entirely known, Kathy puts this scarf on a snowman in the town square, and said snowman is a very ripped snowman. And sure enough, this scarf brings this snowman to life, creating the other character in this movie, Jack. This is another movie that I had absolutely no expectations going into. I thought it looked absolutely terrible, but it was on Netflix, so I was like, why not? I'm not paying to watch this specific movie. And who knows, maybe it'll be like stupid, funny, and actually somewhat enjoyable. And after watching Hot Frosty, I have two main takeaways from this movie. One being that Lacey Chabert is still so unbelievably hot after all of these years. And two, as you might have guessed, yeah, this movie sucks. This is truly one of those sappy Hallmark Christmas movies that somehow wasn't made by Hallmark. For starters, Hot Frosty is so unbelievably predictable. As soon as you see the poster of this movie, or you read the plot synopsis, you know exactly how it's going to end. Just in case you don't want it spoiled, I won't say anything, but come on people, use your critical thinking skills. You know where this movie is going as soon as it begins. On top of that, this movie is described as a romantic comedy, but it's more romantic than it is comedic because I did not find this movie funny in the slightest. And the humor results in one of two ways. Jokes that have a punchline that's a completely unnecessary sexual innuendo, or jokes that are so predictable you see where they are going from a mile away. For example, one of these sexual innuendo jokes, we see Jack on the roof of Kathy's house fixing her roof. I'll elaborate more on that later. And this woman driving by in her car sees this shirtless man on the roof and starts oogling over him, and as a result, she crashes her car in the snow. And the car gets stuck, and Jack sees this, and he doesn't really know any better, so he tries to help her get out of the snow. And he says to her, "Do you want me to get behind you and push?" And the woman looks at him and goes, "Huh? Oh, you mean the car?" Oh. And like I said, a lot of the other jokes are just so unbelievably predictable. You see what the punchline is going to be. For example, Jack is on the run from the authorities of this small town. Again, I will get to that. And Kathy tells him that he needs to do his best to stay in hiding and just lay low. Those are the exact words that she used. And as soon as she said lay low, I was like, he's probably just going to start lying down, isn't he? And sure enough, as soon as she says lay low, Jack starts to slowly make his way to the ground so he can lie down. And at that point, I was truly curious who this movie was made for, because that is a joke that only a 5-year-old would find funny. But this movie is not made for kids. This is absolutely a movie made for adults. So what is with the juvenile sense of humor? I just don't get it. Believe me, I have a juvenile sense of humor. There's stupid things that I find funny, but I know they're stupid, but I feel like the humor in this movie could have been a lot smarter. Oh, and there's a fair share of jokes that reference other movies, other much better movies, I might add. Here, let me just give you some time to think of a movie that Hot Frosty references. And keep in mind, the star of Hot Frosty is Lacey Chabert. Name one other big movie that Lacey Chabert was in. Got it? Okay. I know some smartass out there probably said a completely different movie, but obviously the one I'm talking about is Mean Girls. Cause yeah, there's a Mean Girls reference in here. Kathy is flipping the channels on the TV, trying to show Jack how the TV works, and they stumble upon one of those other Lindsay Lohan Netflix Christmas movies, and Kathy says, "Huh, she looks just like a girl I went to high school with." It's almost as if this movie knows that it's not interesting enough to keep your attention, so it tries to throw nostalgia in your face and say, "Do you remember this other much better movie that the star of this movie was in? Remember how good it was? Yeah, think about that and not how bad the movie you are watching is." It also references Pretty Woman at one point. Like, really? A Pretty Woman reference in 2024? And just like Red One, the characters in this movie are also equally as empty. Because Kathy's only real personality trait is that her husband died and she misses him. And that's basically it. And it's shown later on that she was probably a little over-reliant on her husband, which made it harder for me to like her. Because it's established right at the beginning of this movie that the heater in her house doesn't work, so it's freezing in her house, there's a leak in the roof, there's a giant hole in the stairs. And she refuses to get any of this fixed because she says her husband took care of all of that. And I'm like, okay, woman, you probably should have known that stuff anyway, because what if your husband just up and left you one day? These are things that you probably should know. You should know how to take care of yourself. I might be nitpicking, but that really made it hard for me to like Kathy as a character. And Jack's only personality trait is that he's dim-witted because he was just born, and his only real purpose is just to fall in love with Kathy and for Kathy to fall in love with him. But it's strange because even though this guy is portrayed as a dimwit who doesn't understand anything, including very normal things that everyone would know, he's kind of a genius. Because he says that he's able to just watch television and learn the things that he's watching instantly. Because remember earlier when I said he was on Kathy's roof fixing the leak? Yeah, he learned that from television. He was watching like HGTV or something and he immediately knew how to patch a hole in the roof. So the tones were kind of at odds. Is Jack like an idiot who's learning to find his place in the world, or is he a genius who can learn anything at the drop of a hat? And there's also this ridiculous subplot involving the sheriff of this small town, played by Craig Robinson of all people. But when Jack first comes to life, he's obviously naked and all he's wearing is the scarf. And like I said, since he doesn't know any better, he breaks into a store and steals some clothes. And the sheriff is like hell-bent on finding this guy, because I guess nothing really exciting happens in a small town, so this is all he has to live for. Just finding people who are goddamn motorcycles. Just finding people in the town who are streaking, I guess that's his only motivation in life, is to find streakers. And the entire time he's looking for him, I'm like, really? Is this really that big of a deal? Like, seriously? But something that kind of bothered me, and I also low-key admired, is that this movie really leans into its absurdity. Because those Hallmark Christmas movies are all sappy and corny and absurd, and I think at this point they know they are. But Hot Frosty leans a little bit too much into it to the point where it almost feels like it's a parody of itself. And you could tell that clearly wasn't the case. Without getting into spoilers, toward the end of this movie, all of the townsfolk come to the same conclusions that is so far-fetched. Because we as an audience know that the conclusion they come to is in fact correct, but these townsfolk don't really have any reason to believe the thing that they believe in this moment. Because Kathy says, so wait, all of you actually believe that? And everyone is kind of just looking around, smiling at each other and being all weird. And this one woman says, with a gigantic smile on her face, "It's Christmas." That line right there, I was like, this has to be a joke. It has to be, but it feels like it wasn't meant to be. Alright, is there any good things about this movie? Oh yeah, I guess there's some things. There's one scene where Kathy is talking to Jack and she's admitting that she was a little bit over-reliant on her husband and how much she misses him. And she feels like she made a mistake because she can't live without him and she doesn't really know how to take care of herself. And even though I critiqued that earlier, I'm like, okay, I'm glad that they acknowledge that she's flawed, and I'm glad that the character herself admitted it as well. And this was a really good character moment, but as you might expect, they didn't do anything to expand on it. The only other thing I could say about this movie is that I actually kind of did like Jack as a character. I found him to be very endearing and charming. I liked him quite a bit, if I'm being honest. They just didn't know what to do with him. They didn't know if he was a genius or if he was a dimwit. But yeah, this is just another forgettable Hallmark Christmas movie that Hallmark didn't make somehow. It follows all of the beats that you would expect. It's sappy, it's corny, it's not funny, it's so unbelievably predictable. You've seen this movie a million times before. Overall, I'd give Hot Frosty a 3 out of 10. Okay, I guess I'm done being Scrooge for the day because I just reviewed 2 Christmas movies that I absolutely despised. But thank you so much, everybody, for watching my review of Red One as well as Hot Frosty. If you guys have seen either of these movies, let me know what you thought about them. Did you love them? Did you hate them? Because to my surprise, a lot of people really seem to be liking these movies, and I don't understand why. If you guys like this review, be sure to hit that thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. If you want to see my previous Christmas reviews, I will link those right over here. Other than that, I hope you all have a tremendous rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.